Squadron commanders in the US and Britain entered combat with 200 to 300 missions behind them. German squadron leaders, if they survived long enough, might accumulate 100 to 150. The math of aerial warfare was turning against Germany, and everyone in the Luftwaffe knew it. In early 1944, German fighters were still achieving a respectable kill ratio, roughly 2.5 Allied aircraft destroyed for every German fighter lost. Under normal circumstances, that should have been enough. But Allied production made those losses meaningless. For every German aircraft destroyed, the Allies built 2 more. Germany simply couldn't keep up. By April 1944, the situation flipped entirely. Allied fighters were now shooting down 2 German aircraft for every Allied loss. The Luftwaffe was bleeding out. Its experienced pilots were dying every day, and the replacements arriving in their place were dying even faster. The institutional knowledge that had once made the Luftwaffe the most feared air arm in the world was evaporating with every mission. Galland knew the truth, even before the reports from Rechlin confirmed it. Germany wouldn't win the air war. Germany couldn't even hope to fight it to a draw. The only remaining strategy was to delay defeat for as long as possible. Then came June 1944, the Normandy invasion. On D-Day, the Luftwaffe flew 319 sorties. The Allies flew 14,674, a ratio of 46 to 1. German soldiers fought with no air cover, no reconnaissance, no resupply drops. Allied aircraft owned the sky completely. Through the summer and fall of 1944, Galland fought tirelessly for desperately needed reforms. Concentrate every remaining fighter on defending German airspace. Stop wasting resources on bombers that no longer had strategic value. Accelerate the Me-262 jet into pure interceptor service instead of turning it into a fighter-bomber. His requests were ignored. By January 1945, Göring removed Galland from command, officially for strategic disagreements. But the truth was simpler. Galland had been right all along, and Göring couldn't bear it. Galland asked to return to frontline flying. The request was granted. On February 25, 1945, he formed Jagdverband 44, an elite unit flying Me-262 jets. Many of Germany's surviving aces joined him, pilots with 100, 150, even 200 victories. They flew the jet as Galland had always intended, a pure interceptor, striking bomber formations with hit-and-run attacks. JV-44 destroyed around 50 Allied aircraft in 2 months and lost only 4 pilots. Impressive, but irrelevant. The Allies were sending bomber formations 1,000 strong. JV-44 had barely 30 operational jets. The math was impossible. Galland survived the war, surrendered to American forces in May 1945, and became one of the most valuable intelligence sources on Luftwaffe operations. American analysts questioned him about German evaluations of Allied aircraft. He didn't hesitate. The P-51 Mustang was the best fighter of the entire war. No other aircraft combined speed, range, agility, and firepower so completely. The Germans had captured one, tested it inside out, understood exactly what it represented, and still had no way to counter it. After the war, Galland consulted for aviation companies, including North American Aviation, the very manufacturer of the Mustang. He advised them on fighter design, based on his experience fighting against their aircraft. The irony was never lost on him. Decades later, in interviews, his opinion hadn't changed. The Mustang wasn't decisive because of a single feature. It was decisive because of the combination: the range to escort bombers anywhere, the performance to dominate once it arrived, and the reliability to return home. The numbers prove him right. From December 1943 to May 1945, P-51 units in Europe shot down around 5,000 German aircraft, more than any other Allied fighter. Mustang losses were about 2,500, giving a kill ratio of roughly 2 to 1. But the strategic impact went far beyond the kill count. The Mustang's range forced Germany to defend everything at once. Luftwaffe fighters had to spread across the country rather than focus on specific regions. That dilution made bomber raids far more survivable and placed crushing pressure on German industry. By early 1945, German aircraft production hadn't collapsed because factories were destroyed, but because there were no trained pilots left to fly the planes. Thousands of brand-new fighters sat idle on runways across the Reich, unflyable, unmanned, abandoned. The captured P-51, evaluated at Rechlin, remained there until April 1945. When Soviet forces approached, German technicians destroyed it. They didn't want the aircraft falling into enemy hands again. But by then, blowing up one Mustang meant nothing. The United States had built 15,868 of them. They flew from England, Italy, and China, escorting bombers over Germany, Romania, and Japan. The single Mustang the Germans tested was only one drop in a tidal wave of air power that reshaped the war.
The results were far more dramatic than anyone expected. On December 13, 1943, P-51s escorted B-17s deep into Germany on a raid to Kiel, nearly 1,000 miles round trip. No Allied escort fighters had ever reached that far into the Reich. German pilots, used to attacking bombers once escorts turned back, suddenly found American fighters waiting for them over the target itself. The Luftwaffe lost 18 aircraft that day. The 354th Fighter Group lost 0. By January 1944, Mustang groups were pushing even deeper into German territory, and their presence forced the Luftwaffe to rethink its entire defensive strategy. German fighters could no longer bypass escorts and strike bombers directly. They had to fight P-51s head-on. The air war shifted from bomber interception to brutal, constant fighter versus fighter clashes. And in those fights, the Mustang's performance advantages became overwhelming. The Luftwaffe losses exploded. In January 1944 alone, Germany lost over 1,000 aircraft on all fronts, more than half of them fighters. Hundreds of single-engine interceptors were wiped out. Factories could barely replace what was lost. Production numbers only just matched attrition. February was worse. The U.S. 8th Air Force launched Big Week, 6 days of relentless bombing against German aircraft factories from February 20th to 25th. American bombers flew 3,800 sorties, and P-51s escorted them the entire way. The Luftwaffe committed every available fighter in a desperate attempt to save its industry. It cost them 355 fighters in 6 days, nearly 1/5 of their entire fighter force. Pilot casualties were devastating. 100 killed, 60 missing, 40 wounded. 200 irreplaceable fighter pilots gone in under a week. This was the context in which German test pilots evaluated the captured Mustang at Rechlin. Their reports only confirmed what Galland already feared. Germany was up against more than a superior aircraft. They were facing a complete weapon system, a fighter, a strategy, and an industrial machine that rendered Germany's defensive plans obsolete. Galland had been fighting a losing bureaucratic war with Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring for months. Göring commanded the entire Luftwaffe, oversaw aircraft production, and answered directly to Hitler, and his decisions increasingly defied all military logic. Back in November 1943, Galland urgently recommended concentrating all aircraft production on fighters. Nothing mattered more than defending German airspace. But Göring refused. He insisted bomber production continue, clinging to the fantasy of striking Britain even though German bombers could barely reach England anymore, and their losses were unsustainable. Galland also pushed for modifications to the Me-262 jet fighter. Its incredible speed made it a natural interceptor. It could reach bomber altitude rapidly, slice through formations, and escape before escorts reacted. But Hitler intervened personally, demanding the Me-262 be adapted into a fighter bomber. The added weight crippled its performance. The redesign slowed production, and the Me-262 entered combat too late, in numbers too small to change anything. Even if German leadership had wanted to copy the Mustang, they couldn't have. The reasons were overwhelming. The Mustang's laminar flow wing required precision manufacturing far beyond what German industry could manage in 1944. Any surface imperfection larger than 0.01 inches disrupted laminar flow, and airfields, tools, and factories were being bombed daily. Maintaining those tolerances was impossible. The Packard-built Merlin engine posed another insurmountable challenge. Reverse engineering it would have taken at least 2 years, time Germany didn't have. Installing a German engine wasn't feasible either. The DB603 was heavier, altered the center of gravity, and required a complete redesign of the forward fuselage. Then there were the materials. The Mustang relied on high-grade aluminum alloys optimized for speed and durability. Germany faced severe aluminum shortages by 1944. Factories were already substituting steel wherever possible, increasing weight and degrading performance. But the true obstacle was time. Even under ideal conditions, building a Mustang equivalent would take 18 to 24 months from design to deployment. Germany didn't have 18 months. By mid-1945, the war would be over, and German industry was collapsing long before that. Pilot training was collapsing too. In 1940, German pilots entered combat with about 240 hours of flight time. By 1944, that number had dropped to 112. American pilots trained for 400 hours. British pilots trained for 340 hours. Fuel shortages made German training even worse. New Luftwaffe pilots arrived at frontline units with barely any experience. Many had never fired their guns in flight. Some had never practiced aerial combat at all. They died within days. Between January and May 1944, the Luftwaffe lost over 2,000 fighter pilots, killed, missing, or critically wounded. Training schools produced roughly the same number of replacements, but these new pilots were dramatically less experienced. Meanwhile, American and British pilot quality kept improving. Veterans returned for second tours and passed their knowledge to younger airmen. Germany was drowning, in numbers, in technology, in training, and in time.
On June 12, 1940, Adolf Galland scored his very first aerial victory, shooting down a Belgian Hawker Hurricane over Liège. Just 7 weeks later, he had already reached 17 confirmed kills. By the end of the Battle of Britain, he was in command of Jagdgeschwader 26, with 57 victories to his name. His rise was nothing short of meteoric. What set Galland apart was his extraordinary situational awareness. He could track multiple aircraft at once, read the flow of combat, anticipate enemy maneuvers, and position himself exactly where he needed to be. Pilots who flew with him swore Galland seemed to know where every aircraft would appear before it even arrived. Galland himself claimed it wasn't instinct or magic, just relentless experience and unwavering focus. In November 1941, at just 29 years old, he was appointed General der Jagdflieger, General of Fighters. That made him responsible for every aspect of Luftwaffe fighter operations: tactics, training, equipment, and strategy. Despite his administrative burden, he kept flying combat missions and added another 47 victories, ending the war with 104 confirmed kills. But by the summer of 1944, when test pilot Lerche flew the captured Mustang, Galland was staring at an equation he couldn't solve. The Luftwaffe wasn't losing the air war because of cowardice or bad tactics. It was losing because of math. At the start of 1944, Germany had roughly 1,500 single-engine fighters on the Western Front. The U.S. 8th Air Force alone had 1,518 fighters. The RAF added another 2,500. Combined Allied fighter strength exceeded 4,000 aircraft, more than double what Germany had. And the production numbers were even more terrifying. In 1943, Germany built 11,000 single-engine fighters. The United States built 24,000. Britain added another 11,000. That was 35,000 Allied fighters in a single year, more than 3 times Germany's output. And as the Allies built faster, they also built better. The Focke-Wulf FW-190, once a cutting-edge design in 1941 and still respectable in 1943, was rapidly falling behind. British and American fighters were evolving at a pace Germany simply couldn't match. And then came the P-51 Mustang, a generational leap forward. The P-51's creation was almost an accident. In April 1940, the British Purchasing Commission asked North American Aviation to produce P-40s under license. Instead, company president James Kindleberger countered with an audacious offer. "We can build you a better fighter in the same amount of time." The British were skeptical. Designing a new fighter usually took 3 to 4 years. Kindleberger promised a flying prototype in 120 days. They agreed because Britain desperately needed fighters, any fighters. North America's chief designer, Edgar Schmude, began immediately. He'd studied every fighter design available, British, American, German, French, and identified their shared weaknesses: too much drag, terrible high-altitude performance, and poor range. His solution combined multiple innovations: a laminar flow wing that reduced drag by nearly 20%, a sleek, narrow fuselage with minimal frontal area, internal ducting that efficiently cooled the engine while reducing drag, large internal fuel capacity for unmatched range. The prototype rolled out on September 9, 1940, and made its first flight on October 26, just 149 days after the contract was signed. It was fast and beautifully balanced, but its Allison V1710 engine suffocated above 15,000 feet. The RAF tested it, found it unusable for European air combat, and relegated the early Mustangs to low-level ground attack. Everything changed in April 1942 when Rolls-Royce test pilot Ronnie Harker flew a Mustang at RAF Duxford. Within minutes, he understood what everyone else had missed. The Mustang's airframe was brilliant. Only the engine held it back. He urged the RAF to install the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, the same legendary power plant used in the Spitfire. North America received 5 Merlin engines that July. Packard had begun building Merlins in the U.S., making supply easy. Engineers fitted a Packard-built Merlin V1650 into the 5th Mustang prototype.
It flew on October 13, 1942, and the transformation was shocking. Top speed jumped from 390 miles per hour to 437 miles per hour. Service ceiling rose from 31,350 feet to 41,900 feet. High-altitude performance became world-class. The P-51B Mustang instantly became the fastest operational fighter of the war. But sheer speed wasn't what made it revolutionary. Range was the true breakthrough. Every fighter designer in 1943 accepted the same frustrating truth. More power equals more fuel burned equals limited range. The P-51 shattered that equation. Its aerodynamic purity meant less drag resulted in less power needed to cruise, dramatically less fuel consumption. A P-51B used 85 gallons per hour at cruise. The P-47 Thunderbolt used 205 gallons for the same speed. The Mustang flew 140 miles on 85 gallons. The P-47 flew 85 miles on 205 gallons. With drop tanks, the P-51B could fly over 2,000 miles. Berlin lay just 580 miles from England. The Mustang could escort bombers there and back and still have fuel left for nearly 2 hours of fighting over the target. The first P-51Bs arrived in England in November 1943. Deployment was cautious at first. The 354 Fighter Group received them initially and began escort missions in December.
The moment the Luftwaffe captured an intact North American P-51 Mustang in 1944, they thought they'd struck gold. The aircraft had been forced down after a navigation mistake over occupied France. German technicians repaired it piece by piece, eager to unlock its secrets. But when test pilot Lerche finally climbed into the cockpit and took it into the air, what he'd discovered over the next hour didn't just surprise Berlin, it confirmed Germany's worst fear. The Americans had built a fighter that outclassed anything Germany had, and nothing the Reich produced could close that gap. The shock hit him before he even moved the throttle. The Mustang's cockpit visibility was on another level entirely. Its bubble canopy wrapped around him like a glass dome, giving an unobstructed field of view in nearly every direction. German fighters still used heavy metal-framed canopies riddled with blind spots. Here, he could check his six effortlessly. He could see his own tail. In a dogfight, that kind of visibility wasn't convenience. It was the difference between life and death. He started the engine. The Packard-built Merlin 1650 came alive with a deep, confident rumble. On paper, its 1,490 horsepower matched the Bf-109 G6's 1,475, but Lerche was about to learn the truth German engineers already suspected. Numbers meant nothing without good engineering behind them. He eased the throttle forward. The Mustang launched down the runway with smooth, predictable acceleration. No torque pull, no violent swing. No need for frantic rudder corrections, something every German pilot constantly battled during takeoff. The aircraft lifted gracefully, gear retracted, then the climb began. At sea level, the Mustang climbed at 3,475 feet per minute. The Bf-109 G6 managed 3,346, nearly identical. But altitude was where the Mustang revealed its real power. At 20,000 feet, the difference became impossible to ignore. The Mustang's two-stage, two-speed supercharger kept the engine breathing efficiently. German single-stage superchargers fell flat above 20,000 feet. At 25,000 feet, the P-51 could hit 437 miles per hour. The Bf-109 G6? 386 miles per hour and losing strength fast. And the Mustang wasn't done climbing. Lerche shoved the nose down into a dive and then pulled hard. The control stayed light and razor responsive. Hydraulically boosted ailerons gave the Mustang an incredible roll rate even at high speeds. The Bf-109's controls stiffened badly above 400 miles per hour, often forcing pilots to use both hands just to turn. In the Mustang, Lerche rolled, looped, and snapped through maneuvers with fingertip pressure. No lag, no stiffness, no surprises. Luftwaffe test pilots had reported the same things about other Allied captured aircraft, but Lerche understood exactly what this meant in combat conditions. The Mustang could fight at speeds where German fighters became bricks. He descended to low altitude and pushed the throttle to the stop. The Mustang surged past 400 miles per hour and kept going. German fighters simply couldn't match that kind of acceleration at the same altitude. The laminar flow wing, a cutting-edge aerodynamic design, shaved drag so effectively that the P-51 enjoyed a 20 to 30 mile per hour speed advantage. In real combat, that meant American pilots could choose to engage or choose to leave. German pilots had no say. Then, Lerche looked down at the fuel gauges, and the comparison went from bad to catastrophic. The P-51 carried 269 gallons internally and could mount two 108-gallon drop tanks. Total fuel capacity, 485 gallons. The Bf-109 G6 carried just 106 gallons internally. With a drop tank, 185 gallons. The implications were devastating. The P-51 could fly from England to Berlin, fight, and fly home. German fighters were short-legged interceptors, forced to scramble from local bases and return almost immediately. The Luftwaffe had to fight defensively. American fighters now dictated the terms of every engagement. Lerche landed and filed his report. It was immediate, blunt, and damning. The P-51 Mustang was superior in almost every meaningful category. General Adolf Galland, General der Jagdwiegler, the commander of all Luftwaffe fighter forces, read the evaluation. He didn't need convincing. The report from Rechlin confirmed what he already knew in his gut. Germany was losing the air war, and the gap was unbridgeable. Galland hadn't begun his career as a legend, far from it. He started as a young lieutenant desperate to prove himself. In the Spanish Civil War, he flew H-51 biplanes on ground attack missions. He shot down nothing. He bombed trenches, strafed enemy lines, flew over 300 combat sorties, and never once engaged in air-to-air combat. When World War II broke out in 1939, Galland still wasn't a fighter pilot. He commanded a ground attack squadron flying Henschel HS-123 biplanes over Poland. Still, no aerial victories. He begged repeatedly for a transfer to fighters, but the Luftwaffe needed experienced ground attack leaders. His requests were denied over and over again. Finally, in May 1940, he was sent to Jagdgeschwader 27 and given a Messerschmitt Bf-109 E3. He was 28, older than most fighter pilots, with hundreds of combat missions behind him, but a complete novice in air-to-air fighting.